What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Twinmotion video. In this, we're looking at Twinmotion 2023.1's new glass material. So there's quite a lot to it, and there might even be some other videos that go along with the glass because the glass is awesome. It's easy to use, it's simple, it's much easier than it was before, and it makes sense. It also looks fantastic, so that's why we're really doing this. So if at any point in this video you happen to learn something, which I hope you do, please demolish that like button. Really helps me out a lot. Also consider subscribing. So I'm not doing anything too fancy here because we're going to start in Revit, and we can see that within Revit, I've got this curtain wall, and I'm just going to export this curtain wall using 2023's Twinmotion Direct Open in Twinmotion button. Very simple. I'm so excited about this too. That it is that simple, and I can expect to see that moving forward within to 2024. So this is obviously going to open Twinmotion. Whether I had one open or not, just kind of be aware it's going to do that. Not a big deal for me because I've got a system that can run both of them. So is this a new project or existing? None of this really matters, except I want to keep my hierarchy always. I like that. I prefer that. So new project. Okay, cool. This will open up. So also know that will only open Twinmotion, of course. So we need to direct link synchronize. So let's go ahead and press that. Then we can come over here to our Twinmotion direct link here, and I can see, yep, my Revit is unnamed. I will collapse that by keeping the hierarchy, and there we go. So simple stuff. Not a whole lot that I really care about or need to worry about right at this point. Obviously, I do have this floating. Don't know why. I don't think I have it floating in Revit, but it does not matter for the sake of what we're doing here. We just want to get an idea of what some of these glass look like, just to see what it looks like for one, but also it would be nice to be able to look at the settings, and we will obviously do that. So here we go. I have all of these glass, and let's look at this material in of itself. It's glass, it comes in, and obviously I don't want this glass, so I'm going to ignore this and ultimately replace it. So let's go to our library, materials, glass, and we can see not a lot is new necessarily. There are some new ones which we'll get to, but the main thing is the preview is a bit different, and on the left we can see what it looks like to look at this sphere through the glass, and then on the right side we could see basically the level of reflection we have, because if I see a mirror, I'm not seeing through that glass at all, I'm seeing that mirror. So it's cool. That's really great. It's the type of thing you'd like to see. So let's keep this simple and start with clear glass. So I just want to replace all of that with clear glass. I'll ultimately change each one of these panels to something else so we can get an idea of what these things are. So first of all, let's look at all the different settings that we have with glass. But before we do that, I do want to mention that every single setting within all of these glass materials, basically if this material is in this glass folder by default, then it will have all of these same settings. So if you remember in past versions of Twinmotion, we were working with different types of glass materials, which was kind of annoying because you'd look at one material and you could do certain things with that type of a material. The fact that it's still glass didn't seem to make a difference because you'd go to a different type of glass and it had different settings, different options that you could use and have achieved different looks. So of course we can always achieve the different looks, but the idea now is that the glass materials are all standardized to where, just like any sort of PBR material, physically based rendered material, you can receive the same look out of any sort of physically based rendered material, whether it's glass or not. So in this case, all of these are PBR materials. They all carry the same settings, so you can get all of them to look like all of them. Basically, if you push and pull the right things, change the color and this and that, have the right maps, whatever, then they would all look the same. And that's good just because it's an easy way of standardizing how we would deal with glass materials. So cool. So let's look at all of those settings. We have standard and colored. So what is standard? Well, it's what you'd expect. It's transparent. You can see through it, all this. But then I have colored. And so this doesn't really change the settings as much as it does the look. And to know that you want to deal with colored glass or not, that's a good thing to know. So let's take this up to another notch and make this red. So we immediately see if we have a red colored glass or a red tinted glass, that's kind of what we would expect, and I'm used to seeing something like that. But if I change this to a colored glass, then all of a sudden the glass itself is red and it appears as red. I've changed nothing else, absolutely nothing else. I just have those two options, which is great because a lot of people were working with different colored glass, but had to end up changing the opacity and things like that to get the kind of look that they want, whereas this doesn't impact the opacity or transparency, anything like that, which is awesome. So let's again start with the standard. I want to make this back to white, just so we are working with something more standard. At the right here, we have opacity. This is pretty standard stuff. Basically, can you see through it? Can you not? What level can you? And so this is great because maybe you want to match a certain glass spec, and maybe it's 55% transparent, or in this case, opaque. That's something you can easily match. So that would be 45%. Great stuff. Now, roughness. It's fairly simple. Roughness is basically how you could think of it in two ways. Like, is it a metal? Is it not? How rough is it? How rough is it not? Well, glass is not technically a metal, it's glass. So it's going to have a level of roughness, and that roughness will determine, essentially, it will play into the reflection. You can think of it as that. How reflective is it? Glass is typically pretty reflective. So if I have a spec from a certain glass manufacturer and I want to match the reflectivity, then maybe I do something like that. Well, maybe 72% being 23%. Maybe I just want my 77% transparent, 77% rough and reflective glass. So this is pretty highly reflective glass. It's really easy because these are all real world values. You'll get these things from manufacturers. Before we go into settings further on, let's look at the tint, but more. And so we have our base color here, and this is just the base color map. If we were to look at this, my guess is that it's either white or black. It's just a solid color. Here I also have tint color mask, so I can literally tint using a mask instead. And then I have iridescence. I'm going to leave iridescence for a separate video. It's extremely complicated from the type of settings and the advanced features that we have with that, which is really great. But iridescence is something I'm going to save for another video. So I can come into base color here, select more, and this is where we have the full gamut of saturation, basically RGB values. We can adjust the color to exactly what we want. I covered this a bit in the 2023 update video, but you can take full control of the exact color you want it to be, the level of saturation, and all of this. So I'm not going to really, you can see what happens when I start to change this. Nothing until I actually come in here to change the physical color. And again, it's glass. Most of the time I'm not going to try and do that, nor do I need to, but just know that this is going to have a greater effect on more colorful materials. And if I were to change this back to a colored glass, we would see that work a little bit more. So of course, we're going to see the exact same things with the tint mask. We can invert this or not. And then iridescence, again, we're saving for another video. If we go into more for opacity, we could see, do we want to use a mask? And all this is going to do is it's going to enable it or not. And in this case, I can use my opacity map or not. Because this is a clear glass, because I have nothing fancy going on with the glass, I don't have an opacity map necessarily. Therefore, having the mask on or off really makes no difference. Same with Fresnel. There's nothing really to work with here. If we had more of a mask to work with, we could get more of a Fresnel effect if we wanted to see that. And then roughness, we said, is basically how reflective this material is. We can select more and see there's a lot here. Of course, there's a map. In this case, it's probably just a solid color. I can simply invert that, which is great. Specular, that's nice. Typically leave that at 100% because I want to leave that, leave all of the true reflectivity that I want in the actual map itself and the level of roughness that I'm going to determine. Index of refraction. This is going to be very specific to the type of glass. Also the number of panels you have. So I would look and see where you want this value to be based on different manufacturers. A lot of times because it's a bit confusing from the type of look I would expect to see, I probably want to leave this at 1 to give me more of a default refraction, just so it's not throwing anyone off when they see, glass refracting light in a very weird way. Okay, so then now we're going into the actual settings of the glass. So scale, we know what that does, and this is not going to have a factor at all until we either add a pattern or other things that we change the map in a certain way, and we can see where different types of glass where this might impact. Obviously, we have everything that we're used to seeing within the scale. The normal map, again, there's no normal map required here. you can obviously put it there if you have a push and pull in your glass. Not sure why you would, because most glass will be flat to some degree. Obviously, you can have curved glass, but it's still probably just a flat profile one way or another. So coming in here to more, I can see this is, again, it's just a generic map, which is probably a single color, which doesn't really impact this at all. I can invert that easily or not. And then same with metalness. So is this metalness from the standpoint of glass being reflective? This is why metalness is at 100%. So something that was pretty big is with not every material, but a good portion of materials, but with glass, as of Twinmotion 2023, we can now change the level of metalness by percentage, as opposed to it being 0 or 1, on or off. Is it metal? Is it not? Of course, is it metal or is it not? A lot of times, even with true metals, there's a level of metalness because it's not 100% metal, i.e. it's not 100% reflective, or it's not looking 100% rough or metal all the time. So in this case of glass, we can see, basically how reflective is it, how metal is it? It's kind of the way you can ask yourself whether it should be metal or not, or how metal it should be. So in this case, we can see it changes as the percentages go down. If you did watch my new features within 2023, then you probably saw that there's some materials that basically act like the 0 or 1, on or off metalness that we saw in the previous version. And that is, if we come down to 50%, it's a metal, and then we go down to 49 and it's all of a sudden a not. It's basically on or off, 0 or 1 like before. So with glass, just kind of know what it does. I probably, most of the time, for most standard glasses I'll make, don't need to change this metalness value at all, because it is what it is. So I can come in here to more. Again, we see our texture. We can always invert this, so that's cool. Just know you can really invert any one of these maps, which is awesome. This is really cool. We can immediately introduce some imperfections. Now, are we going to immediately see a lot of imperfections? A little bit. Look at this. You can see right in here, it's not a lot, but it's enough that it makes it look, I would say, a lot more natural. Now, it's obviously a mess. We need to get someone in here to clean the glass, but we can look further. We can go more. We can see fingerprints, fingerprint scale. How big are these fingerprints? Do we have like the Yeti coming up here and touching all this glass? Dust amount, dust scale. So in theory, I can kind of turn everything off without really turning imperfections off. So just kind of know that you can affect it that much, or we can just get ridiculous with it and we can see everything. This is going to more so impact things as you get closer, but also my guess is as we become less or more opaque, we can start to see more of these things. You can see here, I love this. This is cool. And not that I'm just dying to use imperfections, but nonetheless, it's a great option to be able to have, because it literally is more natural. That's really cool. And then finally, advanced options. We've seen this before. Do we want to X-ray the object? Do we just want to see through it? It's going to kind of override the material completely. This is great because, let me guess, you're going to have a panel of glass, at least one, if not more, within a glazing system. And so that's going to be two-sided. So just kind of, I like to do that a lot, just because you have the same material on one side of this, you call it a rectangle or whatever, a profile of a glass, and then you have the same thing on the other side. Now, the real question is, do all the numbers kind of get skewed, like i.e. the opacity, roughness, reflectivity? Does all of that get skewed whenever you make this a double glass, or basically a double-sided material? Well, as you can see, it does. So it's more like, the question is, I don't know what to trust. Are those now in half? Are those values in half because there's two of them and I'm looking through two of them? I don't know. That's kind of up to you to decide whether you like one look or the other. It's really up to you. Weather is nothing new. Basically, does snow and water, does it all react with that? And then what sound does this make if we were to walk on it? Well, it's glass. Sure, that's fine. Makes perfect sense. So that is all of the materials. But I want to start adding, and just to look at some of the quality of some of these different types of glass materials, to just show you side by side what they look like and how really nice they are. I am going to go ahead here and put a basic chrome here on my mullions, darken this up a bit. Cool, that looks good. And now we'll start adding all these new glass materials. So clear glass here, obviously I want to apply this to a specific object as opposed to just one of the panes of all of the panes of glass. I want to apply it to one. Let's go ahead and put reflective, and you can see I'm going to shift between these two materials, and we can see the only difference between these two is just the level of opacity. So like that's really good. It's good to know. It's good to know that that's all that's the difference. So again, here, let's change this one. I will apply this to my object here. With that mirror, we can obviously see that it's a mirror. You know, it's doing its thing. It looks like a mirror. The thing with a mirror that is different is that I don't actually have the ability to change that from a standard or colored glass, because we have specifically chosen a mirror. So just know that the only thing that's different between all of these is just the mirror itself. And we have different things here that we're used to seeing that are pretty old as far as these settings go, but just know that it's a mirror. It's meant to do this, and that's the whole point of the mirror itself, that it is taking care of all of that. So I'm going to leave that there just because it's really nice. Here is a two-sided glass. We'll put that there. And if I look at the reflective glass versus the two-sided glass, obviously I do have a change in the fact that it is colored, and then obviously the opacity and roughness. The opacity and roughness are the things that will change most of the time, and it won't be that much at all. It's just that's going to make what's different in the glass itself. So obviously I have colored versus standard. That's a big thing here. And we can see that, yeah, it's obviously very different. And the nice thing is that we can change that. We can simply change that to standard, and all of a sudden this is the exact same except the opacity and roughness. I'll put this back to color just for the sake of that material. But there are tons of different types of glass. So frosted glass is really nice. We're used to working with that a lot, right? So simply frosted glass there. Two-sided versus frosted. There's not a lot that I can see because, first of all, this doesn't look that frosted. But the thing is, the tint is a specific color, and I can simply make that more or less opaque, whether I see through it or not. Of course, I can make it truly more or less reflective that way. And then obviously I can change the scale. I don't really need to do that much with frosted glass in of itself. But most of this is going to come from just the tint and the opacity level. And we can see whether it's more or less frosted. So obviously once we get into the light, we can see that, yeah, it's obviously more frosted whenever we increase the roughness. And the same thing with the opacity. How opaque do we want it to be, along with the color? Very easy difference, nice. And so everything else here is some of these patterns we've seen before, and this is where some of the scale might come into play. So we can see as I come in here and change the scale, this is going to become a lot more dramatic. And obviously we have a normal map here because there's actually some three-dimensionality to this, which I think is really cool. But is it something I want to see? Not really. I don't know. This is not normally something I'm using, but you can make this look pretty cool. There's a lot that we can do here, whether it's rough or not. I would not think it would be rough because it is, again, glass. And then finally, we can change this one. This is where things start to get really interesting. And I'll cover this in a separate video as well. But we have these basic cutouts. And so these cutouts are, we're not really looking at glass because we're looking at the squares because the way it is cut out. So I'll show you that for sure because I'm going to change that to maybe more of a blue, a lighter blue. And we can see, yeah, those squares are blue, and that is what is changing. Same thing with the settings. This is where scale matters. We can see that makes a big difference. If I really want to just kind of know that everything else in between is nothing. It is 100% transparent. We're not seeing through it, or we're seeing through it fully. So just be aware of that. And what is the evidence that I have for that? Well, the opacity for one. I can bring this down, and all of a sudden, it's still only affecting those squares. But if I come into the opacity, I can see the mask. Now, if I turn this mask off, this is basically saying, well, you've cut out everywhere around these squares. If I turn this off, then all of a sudden we're playing with glass and those squares. That's all kind of working together there. So I can simply use that or not. I can come in here. This is the fun part too. I can invert that. And all of a sudden now we have basically a glass, or you can call it metal, but it is technically glass because it's a glass material, but we are cutting out those squares instead of cutting out around the squares. So I love this so much. And of course, there are tons of different kind of layouts here. I love this one, the round, because a lot of times I'm working with perforated panels, and I can make this perforated panel look pretty good as far as making it look like a metal. Maybe this is 0.5. Obviously, I want this to be a metal. I probably want to invert the mask, of course, one more time. You can see on or off what it does, but I want to invert that, and now I'm essentially cutting out this. I'm going to make it more of a metal looking material here, and so maybe a little bit darker there. And then how rough do I want this? Well, I don't want it to be 100% transparent or reflective. I can even come in here and to make it colored, and so I don't know how much I like that, but you get an idea. We are very close to be able to make a nice colored metal panel from even a glass material. Very weird, but also really cool stuff. I like seeing this kind of a thing that we can really work through. So that's a nice looking metal panel for what it is. It isn't all that fancy, but it's very nice. And moving along down, we can see, some of these things we've seen before. It's just a basic sticker. There's nothing all that fancy there. Not a big deal at all. I'll make sure I'm on the ground and then I'm walking around. So yeah, this is nice. Again, you can see this is really only going to affect the glass, obviously, not the color or whatever, but this color will change that color. So you can see the way it works, and then that we have an actual opacity map that is cutting all of this out. And I can invert that if I want, those types of things. So really all of this is utilizing that specific opacity cutout pattern, which is awesome. And maybe it's not cut out, but it's using that to split things up, because it could be on the opacity map, it could just be on the color map. If it's just on the color map, it's not going to actually cut things out, whereas if it were on the opacity, it would. So cool stuff. Like to see this. Fun stuff. We also then have all of these tinted color glasses. So, and what's the difference here? If we look at our very basic glass at the end, the clear glass versus that glass, well, this is basically 100% transparent and reflective, but it's just a color, and you can see it's colored there and it's tinted with that color. There's really no difference here. I can obviously look at the settings more and see really not much is changing there. It is the exact same essentially, with some of these just changed. So getting down here, all of this is just different color materials, but then we have some of these glass bricks. Again, this is really nothing new. We've always had these glass bricks within Twinmotion, but now it's got all these updated settings, which is really nice to see. It's got the imperfections, whatnot, the two-sidedness. Yeah, so like that a lot, even though I don't care for that. But then we have all these iridescent materials, and so I know I'm not going to go over iridescent, but I do want to show you the difference here. If we click on this clear glass and we come into the tint and iridescence, it's currently off. Obviously, if I turn it on, I get that effect on. And if I come into more, there's really nothing here except intensity, and everything else at 0. Obviously it being off, but I'm going to replace this with that. And we can see that, most of these are the exact same, except it is colored. That's a big thing here. It's colored, and we have iridescence are on. We have it on there. And of course, this is not much different, but it's more or less that it's on, and it's pulling from this specific map and this tint color mask. We can invert this and we get a similar effect, but that's just fine. So everything down here is just different levels and different colors and everything as far as iridescence goes, which we will cover in a separate video. So this is a pretty sweet video. We looked at all the different types of glass. We threw a few different types here. There's obviously a lot of settings that we're used to seeing, which is really nice. But in the end of the day, it's pretty similar. Just the nice thing is that all of it works together a lot more in unison. So that will do it for this video. We looked at all the different settings as far as the new glass material type within Twinmotion. Apart from mirrors, that's still just a mirror. Hope you did learn something. If you did, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out quite a lot. Tells you that you might have learned something, and also consider subscribing too. There will be a lot more Twinmotion videos coming out soon, because we have a brand new update 2023. If you haven't seen that video, go check that out. That one was a big one. Obviously lots of new things coming out still. This and Unreal Engine working together a lot more is awesome to see. So I will see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day, and thank you very much for watching.